talk this evening is to be on Mother of Royalty. It's a rather formidable sort of subject to talk about because the Rebbetzin was a legend b'chayeva. There were so many articles and speeches and biographies about her that it's very difficult to find anything new that can be said. Then I thought we'll just take the idea of the concept of royalty itself, which is a very important theme in Chassidus, talk about that for a little bit, and then some personal reminiscences about the Rebbetzin that perhaps would not be common knowledge and the common experience. But Malchus itself, royalty, there's played an interesting role in Hasidic history. Besides the role it has in Hasidus proper, it was a Mittel Rebbe who was arrested, and one of the charges against him was that he denigrates Malchus, he denigrates the Tsar, insulting him, has contempt for the Tsar, because in his Hasidic writing on Hasidus and the Sfidus, the attributes of Hashem, Malchus is the lowest of all the attributes. And if Malchus is the lowest, it's held in contempt, and Malchus, of course, refers to the Tsar, so the Tsar is in contempt. That was one of the reasons for the arrest. And the way he describes in Chassidus describes the idea of Malchus, that it doesn't have any original qualities. Instead, Malchus is a reflection. It's a conduit, a sort of pipeline for the earlier and superior Chassidus. The different attributes that come before it, they give Malchus whatever character it might have. So, for example, when we deal with Chochmah, the very first one of the attributes, the Chassidus, we're dealing with original thought, with a creative mind, and that captures the imagination. You describe somebody as a Chocham, in particularly the way Chassidus describes a Chocham, this is a very admirable sort of person. Or take the attribute of chesed, kindness, benevolence, giving. A person who's described as having that particular midah and this particular kind of sfira itself, again, it's something for admiration, and it has a distinctiveness, it has a color to it. Gvura, in turn, it insists on high standards. It insists on strictness and on discipline. Again, it has a character of its own. And then Tiferes, harmony, a blending of opposites. Each one of these, in the same way all the way through all 10 of the spheres, each one has a particular nature, a characteristic of its own that's not shared by the others. But then when you come to Malchus, Malchus has nothing distinctive, nothing of its own. It reflects what comes before it and hands it down. So Malchus would not seem to be a particularly proud kind of thing, except that when you come to Rosh Hashanah in this season, the whole theme of Rosh Hashanah is on Malchus itself. The Malchus, Hamlichuni Aleichem, and Melech Yeshel Al Kisir Venisa, stress on the Melech, HaMelech HaKodesh, and so on. And it goes on endlessly, all through the whole Rosh Hashanah season. And if it's the Rosh Hashanah season, it's the key, the foundation of the whole year, the foundation of Yiddishkeit, if you will, as well. So that Melech and Malchus and Chassidus is held in tremendously high regard. Elul, I'll just try to lean back and I can hear that echo coming in.
Maybe try it without the loudspeaker at all for a while. It's echoing some people. The time of Elul, we say Melech Masodir, that the king is in a particular kind of situation that he's not in all through the year. The king is in the palace, he's unapproachable, he's isolated, he's secluded, he's aloof, he's distant from everybody else. The king in his palace is imperious. He issues edicts, and these edicts are not to be defied and not to be ignored. So we find Malchus on the one hand that doesn't have anything of its own, Malchus, on the other hand, seems to be the completely dominant characteristic more than anything else. Well, how can we understand this? First of all, we have to know that the era of royalty, as the world knows it, a world where they speak of kings and emperors, this is gone from history completely now. And the last was probably 1917. Anything that lasted after that was purely symbolic. The kings and the queens and the emperors, these are not what they were at the time that royalty was real. But there's a different kind of Malchus, the kind of Malchus that the Torah and that the Chassidus discuss. And this kind of Malchus is a kind that does endure. We have a wedding picture of our own Chassid. And one of the photographs there is a photograph of 3 queens sitting at one table. And there was no one else that sat with them. This was the Chayav of the Tishrei Rebbe. My wife and I were the next to the last cousin Khaled to go in for the Rebbe's broche before the Gestaltus. And on that picture, we had the tremendous fuss to be able to have the 3 Rebbetzins were there, the Rebbetzin Chana and the Rebbetzin Chana, and Kibod L'Chaim Aruchim Utayim, the Rebbetzin Musi as well. And when you look at that picture, you can see very clearly exactly this is what queens look like when they are real queens, consorts of kings who are real kings. So that the idea of Malchus, the idea of kings and queens, it may be gone for the rest of the world, and it's just symbolic, but for our people, it's a very real and very tangible sort of thing. When you learn Tanakh, when you learn Chumash, Dvorim, learn the Halachas and the Rambam, they speak about kings there. But the kings, in turn, they speak in the name of a higher king. The king of Malchut Yisrael were not the top authority. They weren't the supreme, because there was a melech above them, melech Malchi Amlok. So that the king himself was subject to a law greater than his own. The king had a Torah with him that he carried wherever he went, to remind him that if he has what seems to be power and authority and prestige, he's not to let that delude him into thinking that he really represents the ultimate power. The kings of Israel, they in turn were conduits. They were pipelines for the words of Hashem Yisborach. They were ideally completely disinterested, without any notion of what they want, caring for themselves, not in the very least at all, but they were lev ha'am. They were devoted to the welfare of their people, and that's the only concern that they had. And if a king seemed to have done something that was not according to what David should wanted, a Nosranovi comes to denounce the king throws himself to the ground in contrition, rather than doing like all kings would do and order that man's head to be chopped off. This is the concept of Malchut Yisrael. That Malchut Yisrael were not the ultimate authority, they were not the ultimate power. Malchut Yisrael were a reflection of Ratzon Ha'elim. Malchut Yisrael were the conduits for the Torah to be expressed and as a guide in the lives of the people. They were reflections of Malchus Derekia. There's a kingdom in heaven, there's a kingdom on earth. And the kingdom above, this is what they modeled themselves on. The king had to be the sort that Mishifli Alamayla Gaveya, head and shoulders towering above everybody else. And because he had this superiority over the people, where other people could just feel, the Chassidus explains that the midas of the king were higher than the leichim and the intellect of the people in general. And because they had this superiority over the people, higher and greater than the people, they could lead them to the destiny that Hashem meant for them. And when we try to analyze our own embodiment of what a melech is, a quintessence of what is Torah and what is Hasidus and what is Malchus together with these things. And we have the Rebbe Shliga. So analyzing and understanding and describing him is way beyond our means completely. There were many years ago, I was still a young boy in the yeshiva, not quite one of the bochum even yet at that time, just a yingle in the yeshiva. They had dinners for the yeshiva, I guess it was, over on Franklin Avenue. I don't know what that building is now, but at that time, this was the place that we could go to. The yeshiva would go there. And they would, during the great Nafshonim and Abonim would meet, and they would speak. I remember one of them that was describing the Friedrich Rebbe, and of course the Rebbe was sitting right there at the time. And he quoted a Maimon Chazal that refers to Hashem Yisbarach, that Ilu Yadaiti Hoyisim, if I knew what the Eibishter was, Kavayochel I would be the Eibishter himself. That something that is above us, if we understand it, then it's not above us anymore. We are it. And if it's above us, then we can't know it. Ilu Yadaiti, if we do know it, Hayisim, we would be it. And the way he said then that if we would know the Lubavitch Rebbe, each of us would be a Lubavitch Rebbe, and that's obviously out of the question. So analyze the Rebbe, mother of royalty. What role did the Rebbetzin play, for example? What role did the Rebbe Leivik play? I think this is crucial beyond question, but it's absolutely beyond our understanding. What did each one of the three shutzvim that every person has in him, what did each one of the three shutzvim in the Rebbe contribute? What role did each one of them play? We wouldn't even dare to speculate about it. But still, without taking that approach at all in Mother of Royalty, but there's still something that I mentioned before I do want to share with you, and that's a personal experience that we had. Because there was a tremendous chus that my wife and I had, that we were friends of the Rebbetzin Chana. Or another way, a better way of putting it, that the Rebbetzin Chana showed my wife and myself some warm friendship. And there were several incidents that we were able to have because of that. And I want to describe some of these a little bit, maybe describing something about the Rebbetzin that did not come out in public at a public dinner, and she's sitting on the dais. You wouldn't be able to tell these things. And if there's a whole crowd going in to visit her at her home, you couldn't tell them. But when there were just the three of us, or sometimes we had one of our children with us, then I guess in a sense the real Rebbetzin came out then. For one thing, the mood around her always, that she was sparkling with good feelings. She was a very happy person. And when she laughed, it was a full-body kind of laughter. She didn't chuckle. She didn't just smile. She laughed out loud, and she seemed to be enjoying herself immensely. She felt good, and being with her and then going away, we felt good as well. It was a feeling that was contagious, you might say. Of course, we were living in Nashville, and we drive to New York in the summertime, had our car with us, and because of our mother-in-law, we should be well, the Shvigen and the Rebbetzin were very close from a way, way back, long before any of us were around. And because of that, we were visiting with her, the car was there, and somehow, I don't know where the suggestion came from, that maybe she'd like to go for a ride. Maybe she hinted at it gently, or in any case, we would take her out driving in summer afternoons or summer evenings, sightseeing, taking her on errands, and some very simple, ordinary places, but when she was sort of confined to her little apartment, it would give her a chance to breathe more freely. Taking her, it's almost silly talking about mother of royalty, taking her right on the Staten Island ferry. You get out with the car, you get into the front of it, the wind is blowing at you, she's holding onto the post that the wind shouldn't blow her away. But then turning back, she went out of the car and stayed out in front again. Just enjoying things. Good company to be with. Can't do it now, but then go to Prospect Park and park near the lake, and get out and sit there on a bench or something, and just schmoozing, but enjoying human company and getting out of her apartment. She was very interested in things that were happening in the world around her. And I guess one of the first rides we took, so she says, Idlewild. Does anybody know what Idlewild means? Kennedy Airport now. Why does she want to go to Idlewild? She wants to see a brand new thing that we didn't have there before. The new offices of El Al. It was interesting. She wanted to see the El Al office. And we drove there, of course, and we sat in front of the office, turned off the motor, the ignition, and she just sat there looking quietly at it, didn't make any comments, didn't say anything, just thinking until it was time to go. But it was something that had really engaged her curiosity and her interest, and she wanted to see this thing for herself. And then we'd be sitting around at her home, and for hours, she would be talking about ideas, talking about concepts, about events that were happening at the time, and events that happened before in the past, but an alert, active, very engaging kind of intellect. Friday evenings, Shabbos, after the Shabbos, she liked to go out to hear Makidin and the Darshonim. In those days, Crown Heights had a bunch of them, and apparently very good ones. Of course, it was getting married people to go hear a dash, of all things to hear. But she enjoyed that, no matter what the language was. Apparently, she understood English well enough to be able to be critical, if need be. And she had very clear opinions about their wisdom and about their oratory. And she liked them. She was not a critic. She appreciated things that were good, and she very readily described them in very lauding terms when they earned it. One time I recall she described having bumped into some Russian goyim, and she was very bitter because the classical anti-Semitism of those Russians was very much alive in these people. They've been driven out of their homeland. These were, I guess, like white Russians, not Soviet Russians, the goyim, from the royal days of the Tsar and so on. But the old complicity of schmaltz and anti-Semitism that they had, they still nourished it in their hearts. One of the first times that we visited with Rebbetzin, she asked the Filistin Rabbonis, the Yad Roma, do you conduct your rabbinate with a fist? And I didn't answer her naturally. And then she says, my man hat Filistin Rabbonis, the Yad Roma. That's nice that she described my man. And then I said, yes, my place is in Galut, she says, yeah, my place is in Galut. But the one story that she loved above all else, but she told it a number of different times. She had a neighbor lady who's always used to boast to her about her son, who was a rabbi. And the Rebbetzin would quote this neighbor lady who says, "My son is a rov, if it's not a and she would laugh out loud, roaring. Feels with laughter. It was nice to hear her there. She told us about her shidduch and about my wife's seder, Rebbetzin Chana, and how Rebbetzin was involved in the shidduch between the Rebbetzin Chana and the Rebbetzin. There was a lot of humor in the story that she told, but then when she spoke, it was very serious how she described an emes and gute freit. The way that Rebbetzin was with her parents and with her, it was an emes and gute freit. And to the point where apparently Rebbetzin felt that he had to check out this chassan to see if he's good enough for her. And I guess he gave his stamp of approval because things seemed to work out quite well. But this was a personal kind of thing. I guess personal for her, certainly personal for her, and personal for us as well. She had an intense pride in her husband, in the Rebbetzin. There was, some of you will remember that Shmedel Batumir. Can I be heard in the back there, or the mics? It's okay? That Shmedel Batumir was one of the Ziknei HaChasidim. And I met him, of course, in Paris at that time, back in 1948 when he had just left the Soviet Union. And then years later, my youngest sister married his grandson, so we actually became a platonim. And he told me once, more than once, he told me the story a number of times, how he would feel when he came to the United States, and they would go in, the older Chassidim would go in together to the Rebbetzin, and this was a way of giving kovod and showing respect. I never heard it being done anywhere else outside of our people. the Chabad community. But the daily Ziknei Chassidim going to the Rebbetzin and she receives them, again, this is Malchus. And he says that Shmuel told me that he felt that the Rebbetzin was kind of cold to him. She was unhappy with him. And he knew why. It seems that way back, while still in Lubavitch itself, when Shmuel Batumer was still a Talmud and Pei Tmir. So he was going from Lubavitch, I guess, back to his home, and he passed through Yekaterinoslav, and he naturally stopped in to see that lady. He knocks on the door, and the Rebbetzin opens the door, and here's this bocher who says, "Lady, is shtul?" So she looks at him, "No, lady." Lady. She didn't say it, but he could see on that look that he realized he had said the wrong thing. Okay, what happened immediately, I don't know, whether the lady was in the house or not, but it didn't matter. He was sure that she remembered that. That must have happened 1910 maybe. This was when 1960 or something. 50 years had passed in between, and he was sure that she remembered. So he had to patch this up. And the Shmuel Batumer was a Pikeach. He was smart. He was a Talmud Chacham. He knew Chassidus, and he knew human beings. He was a very intelligent person. He had a very deep voice, and he sits down at the Rebbetz's table in the community. He says, "We have a lot of titles in the Torah. Rav, in Gemara, means somebody, an Ameda from Bovel. An Ameda, Rebbe could be an Ameda in Eretz Yisrael or a Tana. Rabbon goes for the very greatest of the Tanoim. And then you have some that don't have any title at all. Godel mi Rabbon Shmei. Higher than Rav, higher than Rebbe, higher than Rabbon is just say the person's name. Hillel, Shammai. You'll say Reb Hillel, Reb Shammai. So sometimes you call a person by his name because there's no title that can encompass that person. The Rebbe said, wink to him and laugh, and everything is good. I guess she was proud of her husband, and you will not be terribly surprised that she was very proud of her son as well. On President Street, when she was in that apartment, we were sitting there once, across the table from her, and having a very pleasant conversation, and we hear suddenly somebody's fiddling with a key in the doorknob, and she starts to smile, and we just didn't pay any mind to it until the door opens up, and then it comes in. So naturally, we just jumped up against the wall. It was interesting that it came in then, totally unflustered. Everybody else was, he wasn't. I was not in the room as far as he was concerned, but he started a very pleasant, rather lengthy conversation with my wife. And questions and answers up and back. They had a very nice little conversation. And then he said to his mother, he said to us, he said that we should continue, we should stay there and be with his mother for now, and not to disturb ourselves. He's going to come back later for his own visit, that we're not going to take his visit away from his mother. He'll come back again, but we should continue our visit. Okay, he left, we sat down, and she says to us, there was one tiny little incident that happened. It's hard for me to picture how it could have worked out the way that it did. Now you come in 770, that huge base medrash. Thousands of people can get into that without crowding, and how many thousands get in order to crowd up that building. But back then, there was like a little, they called it the shalash. There was the open area that was a driveway in front of the garages. That's where the library is now. Not the library is in the next building, but the library was downstairs. Anyway, they would put the beams over the top and put the schacha, and that was the sukkah. And in other times, They would just put tarpaulins over the top, so it was some kind of shelter. I don't know from what, because the rain got through all the time, but it looked like a covering anyway. There was no Ezras Noshim at all. All I can recall about the specific thing was that Rebbe was up at the top, and he was bringing, he was talking, and I was standing somewhere in the very back, and the Rebbetzin was standing there too. So we would kind of like catch a few words conversation, and whenever the Rebbe turned, so she says to me, whenever the Rebbe turned, she would duck behind me so that the Rebbe shouldn't see her. And she says to me, Ich bin areye ve'eina yireh. Now I see, but I am not seen. And she says to me, why does she do that? Because she feels he's not going to speak comfortably if he sees that his mother is there. So she came there, she wanted to hear him. But he shouldn't see that she is there because she was afraid it might inhibit him. Very nice little insights, these tiny little vignettes into the kind of person that she was. At Tzadekis, as she was called before, but with very delightful human traits. We say, Yehi Zichra Baruch. Our memory should be blessed. And it occurred to me the word Baruch, we see this explains the word Baruch. Like Baruch Ata Hashem, that Ata Hashem should be nimshach. It should be called forth and drawn forth. It shouldn't stay upstairs, up where it happens to be. But the nimshach should be brought forth down to us. And it occurred to me, just writing the notes for this evening, that Yehi Zichra Baruch, that the Rebbetzin doesn't need our brachas, but if her memory could be brought down to us, that we should be able to have that with us all the time, that would be a tremendous bracha for us for sure. And it would be a bracha, particularly now, at the beginning of a new year, for each of us individually, as far as each of us and our families, for the Tishrei as a collective, as an organization, for a Shana Teva V'Sukkah, and like the Rebbe said the other evening, a year in which we will hear the words of Mashiach from Mashiach himself.